The Mâconnais is known for its beautiful and varied landscapes and is fiercely proud to be part of Bourgogne. Vines have been planted there since the advent of Christianity and thrive on this land. They soon spread up the slopes and today form the biggest wine-growing area in Bourgogne. Naturally, this is home to the Mâcon AOC, which today covers 4,224 hectares. The appellation was created in 1937 and is defined in a decree that specifies its geographical location, soil type, cultivation practices, and vinification, where the winemaker truly stamps their mark. This Régionale appellation is divided into 3 levels. The first level covers wines that bear the Mâcon appellation, produced across the entire area and available in white, red, and rosé. The second level covers the Mâcon-Villages appellation and is reserved for white wines produced in a more restricted area than the first level. The third level corresponds to the highest level of Régionale appellations. It covers white, red, and rosé wines from a limited area within the Mâcon appellation. On the label, the name of one of 27 specific villages, known as geographical denomination, is added to Mâcon. Mâcon wines plus a geographical denomination can be produced from vines covering a total of 1,850 hectares, almost half of the entire area of the Mâcon AOC. Now, we invite you to discover these 27 geographical denominations in more detail. Our trip will take us along the course of the Grosne, a small river that separates the hills of the Charolais on its left bank and those of the Mâconnais on its right. The source of the Grosne is in the northern part of the Beaujolais region, from where it flows into the southern Bourgogne a few kilometers to the west of Serrières. Near the Signal de la Mer Boitier, a high point at 758 meters above sea level, the vines of Mâcon-Serrières begin on the slopes of the valley of the Petite Grosne. They produce red and rosé wines from the Gamay grape, which flourishes on these soils that stem in part from the erosion of ancient rock from the Carboniferous period. Just after the village of Serrières is Pierreclos, with a castle topped with multicolored tiles looking down over the village. The vines here produce Mâcon-Pierreclos and grow on the slopes located either side of the Petite Grosne. As we continue along the right bank of the river, the vines of Mâcon-Bussière gradually come into view. Located at between 250 and 350 meters above sea level, they are planted on both sides of the river in this area of transition between sedimentary rock and crystalline basement. Like the neighboring vines of Mâcon-Pierreclos, they produce white, red, and rosé wines. We will now leave this southwestern tip of the Mâconnais, with its evocative name of the Golden Triangle, to return to the Grosne. The vineyards of Mâcon-Milly-la-Martine occupy the westernmost slopes of the Mâconnais. First, we pass through the village of Milly, which owes its fame to Lamartine, celebrated local poet, historian, and politicians of the early 19th century. Then come the villages of Sologny, Berzé-la-Ville, and Berzé-le-Châtel, whose fortress still guards the entrance to the valley. After a few moments skirting the eastern side of the Charolais, we arrive in Clooney. One cannot talk about the Mâconnais without mentioning the Clooney Abbey, which, in the Middle Ages, was the most powerful in all Christendom. It had considerable influence on wine growing in the region, and thanks to numerous legacies and donations, soon became the largest wine-growing estate in Bourgogne, with land as far as the northernmost tip of the Côte de Nuit. As we follow the course of the Grosne as it winds its way through the valley, one can still see some old water mills here and there. On the right bank, the vineyards of Mâcon appear. They flourish on extremely varied soils. The granite is home to the Gamay grape, while marl and limestone tend to be reserved for Chardonnay. Not long after Cormatin, with its wonderful castle and garden, the Grosne is joined by the Guille, whose valley marks the transition to the Côte Chalonnaise. The vines of Mâcon Saint-Jean-Gou-le-National look down on the Grosne Valley from the left bank and the extreme northwest of the Mâconnais, where they grow on limestone and marl soils. Close by the left bank of the river is the Church of Saint-Martin-de-Chapez, one of the oldest Romanesque churches in Bourgogne. The vines are scattered across this area, between the hills around Clooney and the first foothills of the Côte Chalonnaise. At 250 meters above sea level, they look down over the fields and pastures of the Garonne Valley. Now, we must leave the Garonne and head west, cutting through the northern part of this long central ridge. After admiring the little Romanesque church of La Chapelle-sous-Brancion, we see the vines of Mâcon that begin at the edge of the Chalonnaise plain. Protected to the west by the Mancé forest, which tops out at 501 meters above sea level, this terroir is at a crossroads of climates between the warmth of the Saône Valley and the more continental contrasts of the central Mâconnais. The vines grow at between 250 and 320 meters above sea level. As we follow the direction of the rising sun, we soon reach Tournu, a treasure of the northern Mâconnais. This little river port on the right bank of the Saône is home to the celebrated Saint-Philibert Abbatial Church, a prime example of Romanesque architecture. A few kilometers southwest of Tournu and tucked into the valley of the Natouze, the Chateau of Ozney has an imposing silhouette. It was built in the 12th century and developed over the following centuries and was spared during the Revolution. We leave Ozney behind and continue south, where we come upon one of the most famous villages in the Mâconnais, namely Chardonnay. This village no doubt gave its name to the eponymous grape varietal that now enjoys a global reputation. Mâcon-Chardonnay is produced from vines growing on both sides of the valley, which offer very different aspects and soil types. Crossing over the eastern side, we find ourselves in Mâcon-Villages territory. Ideally located facing the rising sun, these vines are mainly planted on the slopes and exclusively produce white wine. Still guided by the river, we join the village of Montbellet to the south. With the Saône to the east and protected to the west by the first foothills of the Mâconnais, the vines of Mâcon-Montbellet, like that of Mâcon-Villages, enjoy a similar contrasting climate from the Saône corridor, with icy winds in winter, frequent fog coverings, and very high summer temperatures. The wines here are exclusively white. As we head up the little river of La Bourbonne, we discover the vines of the Pierreclos appellation, and just beyond them, those of Mâcon-Villages, which enjoy a unique geographical location. Mainly facing north, they form a perfect terrace looking down over the vines of Mâcon-Lugny and the Saône Valley. Chardonnay and Gamay are grown to produce wonderfully vigorous wines. With a Romanesque church dedicated to Saint Jean le Baptiste, the observation point of Bourgogne is like a panoramic gateway to the northern Mâconnais and the Bresse Plain. The village of Lugny sits at the foot of La Montagne du Château. Nestled at the bottom of a valley in a cirque, its sides covered with woods and vines, it gives its name to one of the most emblematic denominations of the central Mâconnais, Mâcon-Lugny. The first cooperative cellar in the Saône-et-Loire was founded in 1926 in this production region at Saint-Jean-Gou-de-Cissé. Today, the Cave de Lugny is the biggest producer in the Mâconnais. Fans of Romanesque art should not leave without a visit to the church of Saint-Cyr et Sainte-Juliette in the neighboring village of Bissy-la-Mâconnaise. Leaving via the north door, one discovers the vines of Mâcon-Cruzille that continue along the hillside from those of Mâcon-Lugny. In this valley that is open to the south and the north, they enjoy the climate of the central Mâconnais. In the Sagy Valley, the vines grow on the slope facing the rising sun all the way to the hill of Brancion in the north, looking down over the verdant valley of Le Grison. To the east and facing the setting sun is a series of hills and flatter areas, stretching up to the edge of the wooded crests. Bordering Mâcon-Lugny on its western slope, Mâcon-Pierreclos is mainly devoted to the production of white wines. To the east, the vines grow on marl and limestone, occupying the western side of the chain of hills in the Pierreclos appellation. As we head south, the valley widens out, leaving more space for the vines. On the western slopes, the red and very pebbly limestone is particularly suited to the Gamay grape, while the marl and white limestones of the slightly steeper eastern slopes are reserved for the Chardonnay grape. Along the valley of the Mâcon, we first come across the vines of Mâcon AOC, which can be found on both sides of the slope. Like Solutre, AOC is a geological and archaeological landmark. The Balme caves have revealed evidence of some of the most ancient human occupation in Bourgogne. From Ige, the only village producing the Mâcon-Ige appellation, the landscape widens out into a huge, long bowl with clearly defined limits. This location offers a good compromise between southerly influences and the cooler weather of the high Mâconnais. The history of Ige is closely linked to that of the hamlet of Demange, whose Church of Saint-Pierre, erected in around 953 by the monks of Clooney, is the abbey's original parish center. Continuing south, we soon reach Mâcon-Villages, where the vines mainly grow on the long west-facing slope. To the east, the vines are spread over the short, steep hillside of the Bois de Verzé. Here, wine growing dates back a very long way. In the 17th century, this area's reputation was already well established. Thanks to the installation of a communal bottling line at the Chateau de Vaux in 1960, the winemakers of Verzé and their colleagues from the Union of Cooperative Cellars really boosted the reputation of Mâconnais appellations. We are now flying over the southern part of the central Mâconnais, where the valley of the Petite Garonne and its tributary, Le Fil, have found their way through this network of parallel hills. Before taking this open passage from west to east, let's just take a look at this little village with the evocative name of La Roche-Vineuse. Part of the Lamartinian Valley, it looks like it's guarding this important communication route. The vines of Mâcon-La Roche-Vineuse grow on the hillsides here, facing east-west, all the way around to south-southwest. We'll follow the Petite Garonne through the village of Prissé, before rejoining the Saône, south of Mâcon. This village shares its terroir between the Saint-Véran appellation and the geographical denomination appellation Mâcon-Prissé. Its vines grow on the flattest areas closest to the river, their roots plunging into ancient sedimentary alluvial terraces. The poet Lamartine liked to meditate and write in his home at the Château de Monceau in Prissé, nicknamed La Solitude de Lamartine. Shortly before flowing into the Saône, the Petite Garonne passes below the last hills of the mountainous chain that goes from Tournu to Chantré. The vines of Mâcon-Chardonnay grow on the gentle slopes leading down to the water. We are very close to the city of Mâcon now, and this proximity along with its port enabled Chardonnay to play a leading role in boosting the reputation of Mâconnais wines. Let's keep heading south for a few more moments. Beyond the valley of the Petite Garonne, we reach the first hills bordering the Saône plain, where the Mâcon-Locher geographical denomination is located, centered on the village of Locher, and linked with the name Mâcon since 1972. Locher provided Mâcon with its status as a wine-growing territory. Thanks to its port and railway line, this village has played an historic role in the wine trade. Nearby, just beneath Puyi the vines of Mâcon-Villages grow at the foot of a long and gentle east-facing slope on clay and pebbly scree. Thanks to its strategic location, the Chateau de Villages had control over the Saône plain. Makonshantre, which borders the famous Puyi, is the most southerly point of the Mâconnais hills. The vines here grow in very similar conditions to those of Mâcon-Villages and Mâcon-Locher, all of them producing white wine from the Chardonnay grape. Chantre has left its mark on the wine-growing history of France thanks to local man Charles Perraton, who in 1935 helped establish the first specifications governing the future AOC scheme. Before our trip is finished, we will have to fly over the most famous and most spectacular part of the Mâconnais. These are the rocky escarpments of Solutre and Vergisson. These impressive limestone spurs peak at 495 meters above sea level and look down over the valley to the west from a vertical cliff while descending down an even slope to the east. At the bottom grow the highly regarded vines of Puyi. On the backside of the Roche de Solutre, Along the valley of the Petite Garonne, the vines of Mâcon grow on east-facing berms at around 200 meters above sea level. Clay and sand alternate with veins of limestone broken up by erosion. The wines of Mâcon are produced in red, white, and rosé. Let's go a little closer to this famous rock and discover the village of Solutre Puyi. Here, two islands of vines together make up the geographical denomination of Mâcon-Solutre Puyi. The first is beneath the Roche de Solutre, while the second is on the ridge of the Mont de Puyi. They both border the vines of the Puyi appellation. The vines of Mâcon, despite being scattered and bordering the appellation of Puyi, Saint-Véran, and Mâcon-Lugny, are part of the village of Fuissé. In this particularly sunny area, summer and temperatures are usually significantly higher than the average for the region. Let's discover the village of Vergisson, the center of another geographical denomination. Sitting on the rounded hilltop of the Roche de Vergisson, at the heart of the escarpments of the southern Mâconnais, the vines of Mâcon-Vergisson are bordered by the village of Prissé and the Saint-Véran appellation. Facing in a slightly northeasterly direction, but well sheltered by the nearby woods, this appellation produces beautifully lively wines. These three additional geographical denominations that sit on the periphery of the Puyi appellation are all made exclusively from the Chardonnay grape. Here we are at the end of a voyage through which we were able to admire the great variety of landscapes of the Mâconnais region. The 27 villages we have traveled through or flown over are home to terroir where the Chardonnay and Gamay grapes truly flourish. The wines they produce offer extraordinary diversity, whites that range from those with wonderful vigor and perfectly balanced aromas of citrus and white blossom, to more rounded, broader examples with notes of ripe fruit that are generous in the mouth. The reds also fully reflect this impressive richness of terroir. Alongside fruity, smooth, and moorish examples, one also finds more full-bodied wines with more tannins and spice, offering excellent length. In every village, wine lovers will be seduced by bottles bursting with quality and personality. There is no doubt that the Mâconnais is now well established at the new El Dorado of Bourgogne. Its countless treasures are just waiting for you to come and discover.